Let's talk about the power of the blood. Believers always speak about the power of the blood. Am I wrong? The power of the blood of Christ. But do we truly know the significance of that statement? The scriptures say that the life of the creature is in its blood. From Genesis to Revelations, we witness the spilling of blood. The purpose of the blood of animals being offered up in a sacrificial ritual was the expiation or atonement for sin. But how can the blood of animals have any effect over our sin? That's a question. Think about that for a moment. And as we go through this, notice the word atonement. Does anyone know what that word atonement means? Anyone? It actually means a covering up, a covering up. And we're all old enough here, except for my children, to remember whiteout.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And when you made a mistake and you had a pen, it wasn't the eraser mate back then, right? What did you do? You took that white out, you covered it up, you blotted it out. But if you took that piece of paper and you put it up to the light, could you still see the mistake?
Yeah.
You guys remember doing that?
Yeah.
That's a picture, a vivid picture of what atonement is. It's a covering. The animal sacrifice can't remove, but it covered the sin. It satisfied God temporarily. Okay? Later on, when we talk about the new covenant, we're going to talk about propitiation. That's a satisfying sacrifice that removes the sins, plural, the offenses before God. There is a difference. Jesus was the propitiating sacrifice that satisfies God's wrath towards sin. And there's a big difference. So if I gave you a visual of that, something modern would be your keyboard on your computer. You type, you misspell a word. What do? Delete, 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 and then you retype. Can you put that up to the light and see the mistake? That's propitiation, if I gave you a visual. He took care of the offense. This example of animal sacrifice and covering sin, where do we get this from? Let's examine Leviticus 17, starting at verse 11. For the life of a creature is in the blood, and I have given it to you to make atonement, a covering. For yourselves on the altar. It is the blood that makes atonement for one's life. We're all familiar with Romans says that the wages of sin is death. And therefore, it had to be one life for another. The animal's innocence was in exchange for man's transgression. The blood of the animal would cover sin, but it did not have the power to remove sin. And that's why I gave you that visual about what atonement is, a covering. It did not remove. In the book of Hebrews, a book that most believers, I hate to say it, but it's true, deeply should study, but they usually neglect it. It's probably one of the most neglected New Testament books, or often misquoted. The blood of animals would cover sin, but it did not have the power to remove it. In Hebrews 10, starting at verse 1, we read, For since the law was but a shadow of good things to come. Let's pause on that for a second. The law was a shadow of things to come. That means it isn't the substance. Your shadow, you need a light, reflects, and then the shadow is something else. It is not the actual item that the light is shining on. It's a shadow of things to come. Instead of the true form of these realities, it can never, by the same sacrifices that are continually offered every year, make perfect those who are drawing near. This is all about the sacrificial system that God had established during the Mosaic covenant. Otherwise, they would have ceased to be offered, the sacrifices, since the worshipers, having once been cleansed, would no longer have any consciousness of sins. But in these sacrifices, the sacrifices of the Mosaic covenant, there is a reminder of sins, of your offenses, every year. Why? For it's impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. Again, atonement. But if they had found that one perfect sacrifice, this would have stopped. That's what Jesus was. He was that Lamb of God who took away the sins of the world, the propitiation. God was satisfied. That's why no longer there is no Jewish temple. And even today, they occupy Israel. Where's the temple? Where's the animal sacrificing? There is none.